Chapter 1. The first thing Alpha King Edric Greer conquered was the Howling Plains. The second was the unified armies of the 3 river packs. The third and most terrifying was Toast. He stood in the doorway of the royal bedchamber, a man who had wrestled bears for sport, holding a silver tray as if it were a live bomb. On the tray sat a plate. On the plate sat 2 slices of what had in a previous life been bread. Now they were blackened squares of carbon, rigid and desolate, smelling faintly of smoke and shattered pride. His mate May, 6 weeks pregnant and reviewing the castle's quarterly supply ledgers, with the focus of a woman who had single-handedly restructured Stonefall's grain distribution in her first month as Luna looked up from her work. Her gaze went from his soot-stained face to his trembling hands to the offering. A slow, precise smile touched her lips. "A bold choice for the morning," she said. "It's crisp," Edric managed. The wolf part of his mind, the part that ran hot and instinctual, that had mapped the weaknesses of every enemy general before his conscious mind had formed a plan, surveyed the damage with its usual boundless optimism. "This is progress. Yesterday we did not attempt toast. Today we have attempted toast. The toast is black, yes, but it exists. Existence is the first step. We are on a journey." "I can see that," Mag said. She patted the spot on the bed beside her. "Bring it here, my conquering hero." He crossed the room with the careful steps of a man navigating a minefield. He sat, placing the tray on her lap. The wolf continued its encouraging assessment. "She's looking at the toast. She has not left the room. This is acceptance. Acceptance is the second step. We are growing." We'd picked up a slice. It made a sound like snapping slate. She took a bite. A loud, definitive crunch echoed in the silent room. Edric flinched. He watched her chew, his jaw tight, his entire body braced for the verdict. Her opinion on this piece of ruined bread had somehow become more important than treaties, borders, or the continued stability of the entire continent. She swallowed. "A bit dry," she pronounced, "but it has a certain structural integrity." He let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Relief washed over him so intensely he felt dizzy. She consumed the toast. She found merit in the toast. "This is validation. We are enough. We have always been enough. Today the toast. Tomorrow the world." Mag smiled and took another bite. Edric watched her, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. She had been Luna of Stonefall for 4 months, and in that time she had reorganized the castle's supply chains, resolved a boundary dispute between 2 farming families that had been festering for a decade, and memorized the name and birthday of every member of the household staff. She was, by any reasonable measure, the most competent person in the building, and she was eating his toast. "The doctor came by while you were battling the larder," she said, tapping a piece of toast against the plate to emphasize its hardness. "It's confirmed." Edric froze. The wolf went still. Then, with a reverence it had never shown for any military victory. "Life. New life. We made life. This is the greatest thing we have ever done. And we have conquered 3 territories. Nothing else matters now. Protect. Provide. Begin immediately." A primal, unshakable certainty settled over him, a geological shift in his soul. He, and he alone, must feed her. It wasn't a choice. It was a mandate from the oldest part of his being. He was the alpha. She was his mate. They were his pups. He would provide. He looked from her face to the blackened toast. A new wave of terror, cold and profound, washed over him. He had absolutely no idea how to do that. "Right," he said, his voice husky. He stood up, squaring his shoulders. "Tomorrow porridge." Me's smile whitened. "I can't wait." Chapter 2. Down the hall, Declan, the king's beater and long-suffering best friend, leaned his head against the cool stone wall. He could smell the smoke from his office. He could also hear the faint, muffled sounds of Chef Anil weeping in the pantry. Again, Declan sighed, opened a small leather-bound journal he had begun keeping on the day Edric had first announced he would be handling the Queen's meals personally, and wrote, "Day 6, the toast. Chef Anselm has wept for the 3rd time this week. I have ordered additional fire blankets. The king shows no signs of surrendering. He continues to run the kingdom flawlessly between the hours of 9 and 5. It is only at dawn and dusk that chaos descends. Meanwhile, a different problem was demanding his attention. His younger sister, Elizabeth, was of an age to be betrothed, and a politically advantageous match had been proposed with Beta Marcus of the Stonefall pack. The only problem was that both Elizabeth and Marcus were so cripplingly shy that their first meeting had consisted of 45 minutes of complete silence, while they both stared intently at a tapestry. Declan was supposed to be arranging a second, less excruciating encounter. Perhaps a walk, he muttered to himself, rubbing his temples. No, too much pressure to converse. A meal. God, no. He made a note. Find activity requiring no conversation. Falconry? Chapter 3. Before dawn the next morning, Edric woke standing in the kitchen. He didn't remember getting out of bed. He didn't remember walking down the servant's stair. He was just there, barefoot, shirtless, holding a pan, staring at the larder door. His body had carried him here, while his mind was still asleep. The wolf was already awake, already certain, already making plans. We are here. Good. The mate needs feeding. The pups need feeding. We begin now. He put the pan down, shaken. He wasn't hungry. Snorts. He hadn't chosen to come here. Something older than choice had moved his feet. He left the kitchen, padded through the castle, down the narrow servant's stair, and out through the garden gate. The air was cold and sharp, the kind of pre-dawn that tasted of frost and salt. He stripped, folded his clothes on the stone bench, and shifted. The change came fast, a familiar unfolding, bones rearranging, skin becoming fur, the world tilting, and then snapping into a different kind of clarity. He stood on 4 legs in the dark garden, enormous grey-black, his breath steaming in the cold air. The world was louder and simpler. He could smell the sea 2 miles away. He could smell the rabbit that had crossed the garden wall an hour ago. He could smell faintly and perfectly Meg asleep in their bed, 3 floors up, the warm, distinctive scent of her that had become the center of his world, now threaded with something new and faint, something that wasn't there before the pups. He ran along the cliff path, through the scrub pines, down to the rocky shore where the surf hissed against the stones. Not thinking, not planning, just the stretch and burn of muscle, the rhythm of paws on wet earth, the uncomplicated joy of being fast. He needed this. He hadn't shifted in 4 days, and the restlessness had been building, a skin itch he couldn't scratch in human form. He circled back as the sky began to lighten, shook the salt from his fur, shifted back in the garden and dressed. The first few seconds after returning to human form at Warway slightly disorienting. The world too bright, the sounds too crisp, his body a slightly wrong shape. Then it settled. He felt steadier. He walked back into the kitchen to face the porridge. Chapter 4. The porridge did not go well. It began as a substance that had the color, scent, and approximate density of wet cement. Edric stirred the pot with a large wooden spoon, his brow furrowed in concentration. He had followed the instructions: water, oats, a pinch of salt. It seemed so simple, yet the contents of the pot had defied him, undergoing a strange alchemical transformation into a glutinous gray paste that clung to the spoon with grim determination. The wolf unfazed. We are learning. Every great journey begins with a single step. This porridge is our single step. It is a heavy step, a very dense step. But it is ours. It's just a bit thick, Edric muttered, adding more water. The paste hissed, then absorbed the liquid with no discernible change in consistency. He put his full weight into stirring, his bicep bulging. The spoon, a sturdy piece of oak that had been in the castle kitchens for a century, groaned in protest, and then snapped clean in 2. Edric stared at the broken spoon, then at the malevolent grey goo in the pot. He felt a flicker of the same rage he'd felt facing the traitor, Lord Fenris, on the battlefield. This was somehow worse. Fenris had only tried to take his life. The porridge was trying to take his dignity. The spoon gave its life for the cause. We honor its sacrifice. Onward. He scraped a serving into a bowl, garnished it with 3 hopeful-looking berries, and carried it to Mag. She was in the walled garden, sketching defensive patrol routes on a map. She'd noticed a gap in the northern watch rotation and had been quietly restructuring it for a week. She looked up, her eyes bright with sharp amusement. Today's masterpiece? she asked. He set the bowl down. The berries immediately sank into the grey mass and disappeared. It needs a firm hand, Edric suggested, his face growing hot. Mag gripped the spoon with both hands and gave a mighty heave. It came free with a thick sucking sound. She tasted it. She chewed and chewed and chewed. The texture is unforgettable, she finally said, and the berries were a lovely thought. She ate it without medical intervention. This means our margin of error is wider than previously estimated. We can afford to be bolder. Tomorrow we attempt eggs. Eggs have variables. Variables are where champions are made. Chapter 5. Edric spent the rest of the morning in the council chamber, sharp and focused, working through a border dispute with the Ashford farmsteads and reviewing the winter grain allocations Mag had drafted. He was good at this, the weighing of claims, the reading of men, the decisions that held a kingdom together. His mind was clear, his authority easy. Nobody in the council chamber would have guessed that 2 hours earlier he had been at war with Oates. It was at lunch that the first report came in. Declan entered the chamber with a dispatch from the Eastern Patrol. 2 rogue wolves had been spotted crossing Stonefall territory near the Black Ridge Pass together. Declan set the report down with a frown. "Rogues don't travel in pairs," he said. Edric picked up the dispatch, his jaw tightening. Rogues were lone wolves, packless, unpredictable but solitary by nature. A wolf without a pack was incomplete in a specific physical way. Like a frequency they were supposed to be part of that they could no longer hear. They didn't form bonds. They didn't cooperate. That was the whole point of being rogue. Could be coincidence, Edric said, though his instinct said otherwise. 2 rogues crossing at the same point, same hour, same direction, headed toward the castle. Declan shook his head. That's not coincidence. That's coordination, Edric stood. The wolf instinct, which had spent the morning cheerfully encouraging him through culinary failures, shifted register entirely. Something was wrong in the territory, and it was moving toward the mate. This was no longer about breakfast. This was the real thing. The part of him that had conquered 3 territories was wide awake. Double the Eastern patrols. "I want scouts on the Black Ridge by dusk," he looked at Declan. "And get me the rogue activity reports for the last 3 months. All of them." Declan nodded and left. Edric stood at the map table, tracing the patrol routes with a finger, his mind working. 2 rogues working together, moving towards Stonefall. It was wrong in a way he could feel in his bones. Chapter 6. That night, Edric spread the reports across his study desk. 12 pages of incident logs dating back 3 months. 3 sightings in month 1, 4 in month 2, 5 so far this month, and it had barely started. All of them on the Eastern Territories. None of them fatal. But each one was a test, a probe. He read the details by lamplight, the rest of the castle sleeping around him. Rogues spotted near Black Ridge Pass. Rogue fled from scout patrol. Rogus observed crossing Eastern Ridge heading west. Each report confirmed what the scouting parties already knew. Pack wolves didn't move this way. They didn't form tactical groups. They didn't have a direction. The wolf, reading over his shoulder through the window of human consciousness, shifted from its cheerful baseline to something focused and ancient. Coordination strategy. Someone is teaching them. Someone is pointing them. We do not like this. Edric pushed back from the desk and moved to the window. The eastern hills were dark, the night clear and cold. He could run the patrols again tomorrow, tighten them further, restructure the watch rotation so their predictability was gone. But someone had already seen through the last rotation. Someone had inside information. He dressed in riding clothes and went to the stables. The castle guards watched their king with surprise as he saddled a horse. Not the kingly procession he usually took, just one man and a beast riding out into the pre-dawn dark. The eastern border was 3 hours of hard riding. Edric covered it in silence, his mind working through the patterns, the reports, the careful placement of the rogue sightings. They formed a line. He realized a line testing the weakest points in his defenses. A line that suggested knowledge. The patrol he found at the Black Ridge Pass was alert, professional. He approached carefully in the dark, not wanting to startle them into an attack. The captain, a grey-muzzled wolf named Thorin, who'd served under Edric for 8 years, phased back to human form at the sight of his king. "Your Majesty, not expected at this hour." "Show me the last sighting," Edric said without preamble. Thorin led him to a clearing /4 mile north. The tracks were clear, even to human eyes. 4 separate animals moving in formation, their paths overlapping but distinct. Edric shifted to better read the scents. The stench of pactusness was there, sharp and acidic, but underneath it was something else, something controlled, something organized. A wolf scent, yes, but with threads of human underneath it. Whoever was leading them had been a pack wolf. Whoever was leading them had defected. Not rogues created by circumstance. Then rogues recruited. Rogues corrupted. And many in the formation this time. Edric asked Thorin, shifting back. 4 distinct scent trails, but the lead scent. Thorin hesitated. "Begging your pardon, sir, but it doesn't smell like a wolf. Not a pack wolf. Something older. Something that's been packless so long the scent has rotted out." Edric nodded. That confirmed it. Whoever was leading them was a rogue of the dangerous kind, one who'd been alone long enough that their wolf had gone feral. Those were the ones who had nothing to lose. He spent the rest of the night riding the eastern border, reading the tracks, understanding the pattern. By the time the sun rose, he had a map of the probes in his head and a cold certainty in his bones. This was the work of an intelligence and purpose working through packless wolves, because packed wolves would have honor and restraint. Packless wolves had only hunger, and someone was feeding that hunger. He rode back to the castle with the first light. His fatigue forgotten, his instinct singing, the wolf was awake now fully and completely. It was not offering encouragement. It was offering something older. The clarity of a hunter who has found the scent and needs to run it to ground. Chapter 7. That afternoon, Edric made soup. The soup caught fire. He stood in the smoke-filled hallway holding a tin of blackened liquid while Mag and Declan watched. "Soup is ambitious," Mag commented, fanning smoke from her face. "Perhaps something less flammable." "A salad," Declan sighed. "Your Majesty, Lord Alistair has formally requested an audience." He's citing the unusual atmospheric conditions emanating from the castle as a potential violation of the Clear Skies Treaty. "Tell him it's a new form of defensive smokecock screen," Mag said without missing a beat. Highly advanced, very secret, Edric stared at his mate, overwhelmed with love. The wolf agreed. "She is extraordinary. She takes our failures and turns them into strategy. We are blessed. Also, the soup was very close this time. Very close. We are nearly there." The soup had been on fire. They were not nearly there. That night, Edric made a decision. He was done. Chef Anselm could handle the meals. He was a king, not a cook, and the castle could not sustain another fire. He told himself this firmly, lying in bed, Mega asleep beside him. He meant it. He was resolved. He was finished. At 4 in the morning, he was standing in the kitchen again, holding a whisk with no memory of getting up. The wolf cheerfully, "We are back. We never left. The mate needs us. The pups need us. Rest is for wolves who are not us." "I didn't choose to come down here," Edric whispered to the empty kitchen. The wolf did not reply. It didn't need to. They both knew who was in charge of this particular decision, and it wasn't the king. That afternoon, Mag found a use for the leftover porridge. A large paving stone in her garden had come loose. She scooped the cold, solid paste into the gap and pressed it into place. It set instantly, rock solid. A passing guard watched, his eyes wide with awe for his queen. Declan's journal. Day 8. Porridge repurposed as building material. Chef Anorm has barricaded himself in the wine cellar. The king ran a flawless trade arbitration this afternoon, then set fire to a soup. The duality of this man is something I will never understand. The doctor calls it a nesting compulsion, common in alpha wolves approaching fatherhood. The instinct to personally provide for the mate becomes physiological, not psychological. The king cannot stop. I have confirmed this. He tried. He lasted 4 hours. Also, the rogue reports are troubling. 3 more sightings along the eastern ridge. All in pairs. The king has noticed. He rode the border at night. He does not look worried yet, but his hand keeps going to his sword when he thinks no one is watching. Something has shifted in him. Chapter 8. Lord Alistair Finch of the Cragspire Pack arrived like a character in a play he'd written himself. He swept into the great hall, his cloak a swirl of impossibly black wolf fur, his silver hair catching the light. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, and he moved with the languid confidence of a man who had never once wondered if he'd left the stove on. His cloak alone was worth more than most families earned in a season. Edric noticed the boots, though the soles worn thin, reheeled twice. A man spending everything on the parts that showed. Edric greeted him, feeling at a disadvantage only because he was fairly sure he still had flour in his eyebrows from the morning's bread attempt. The dough had risen with explosive force and was now slowly creeping across the kitchen counter like an alien life form. "King Edric," Alcestis said, his voice smooth as polished obsidian. "A pleasure. We've been seeing smoke signals from your ramparts. I trust the kingdom isn't falling." "Just expanding our culinary horizons," Mag said, stepping to Edric's side. Sharp and composed, Alcestis' eyes slid to a bump. A flicker of calculation crossed his features. The wolf registered the look immediately. "He is assessing the mate. We do not like this. We are noting it. We are choosing to remain positive. People can grow. Perhaps he will grow. We are almost certain he will not. But optimism is a practice." "Lord Alcestis," Max said, a voice cool. "Welcome to Stonefall. I trust your journey was not too dusty." Alcestis' smile tightened. "Queen Mag, domesticity seems to suit you both." In the council chamber the next afternoon, Alcestis spread his documents across the table with the theatrical flourish of a man dealing from the bottom of a deck. "The shipping costs alone have increased 12%. My people bear the burden. We simply ask for fairness." He paused, letting the words settle. These routes were crag spires for 15 years before the unification. "King Edric, my people built them. The roads, the waypoints, the infrastructure that makes your kingdom's trade possible. And now we pay for the privilege of using what we created." Mag was already moving before he finished speaking, her fingers tracing the manifests. "Your people built the roads," she said flatly. "Stonefall built the trade. The treaty reflects that." She looked up from the documents. "But what the treaty does not reflect is the 15% handling charge your personal warehouses take before the ore even reaches the shipping lanes. That's not in the original agreement. Lord Alcestis, you added it." Alcestis' smile froze. His eyes widened fractionally, the only crack in his composed facade. Declan, watching from his position against the wall, looked at Marg with undisguised admiration. Edric, who had been reviewing the documents himself and had already flagged the discrepancy in his morning briefing notes, leaned forward. The chiral movement was deliberately calculated, the shift of a king settling into his authority. 3 years ago, Edric said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a man used to being obeyed. "You added it 3 years ago and hoped no one would check." He held the man's gaze, letting the silence do the work. The wolf, watching Alcestis squirm with the kind of focused intensity it usually reserved for prey, offered its assessment. "He is afraid now. Good. Fear makes people honest. This is leadership. We are very proud." Alcestis' fingers drummed once on the table. "A tale," Edric noted, then stopped. The theatrical mask slid back into place. "An accounting error, surely. I'm certain my steward can clarify." "Your steward," Mag interrupted, not unkindly, "submitted the same error on 3 separate trade routes with supporting documents. That's not an error. That's a policy." She slid a ledger across to him. "This is the one we're questioning. There are 14 others." Alcestis' jaw tightened. He recovered smoothly, but the damage was done. He agreed to review Stonefall's counter-proposal and withdrew, not with grace, but with the careful steps of a man who'd been thoroughly dismantled and was trying to pretend it hadn't happened. Declan's journal that evening. "Lord Alcestis' cloak costs more than his pack can afford. The man is bleeding. He just doesn't want us to see it." As they left the chamber, Edric turned to me. For a fraction of a second, the old instinct surged. The alpha's protective urge, the primitive need to tell her to rest, to sit down, to let him handle the next session alone. Pregnancy made the instinct worse, not better. His wolf wanted to build a nest and put her in it and guard it from the world. He caught himself before the words formed. She was looking at him expectantly, her sharp eyes reading his hesitation. "The grain allocation draft you wrote is better than anything the council produced last year. He said instead, "Walk me through the winter projections after dinner." Mag looked at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Then she smiled. Not the patient, amused smile she wore when he brought her burnt offerings, but something warmer, something that said she knew exactly what he was doing and appreciated him for doing it anyway. "I'd like that." Chapter 9. The rogue situation escalated. Over the next 3 days, the Eastern patrols reported 7 more sightings, always in pairs, always moving west toward the castle. And then a shepherd from the Green Hollow settlement came in, bruised and shaking, to report that 4 rogues, had attacked his flock at dusk. They hadn't been hunting for food. They'd been testing the response time of the nearest patrol. Edric stood at the map table. The reports spread before him and felt the old clarity settle over him. This was what he was built for. The patterns were there. The probing attacks, the coordinated movement, the testing of defenses. "They're being directed," he said to Declan and Mag. "This isn't random. Someone is pulling them together. Rogues don't follow. Declan said it's against their nature, which means whoever is leading them is offering something a rogue can't get alone." Mag said, her mind already working. Safety in numbers, territory, a pack essentially, without the obligations of one. Edric looked at her. A shadow pack run by someone who knows how real packs work well enough to exploit the gaps between them. Mag tapped the map, her finger tracing the patrol routes. "They're probing our eastern border because it's the longest and hardest to patrol. They know our watch rotation." That gave Edric pause. Their watch rotation was internal information. The patrols were restructured weekly, deliberately, to avoid predictability, but the general framework was only known to the senior pack members and the castle council. "Someone's been talking," he said quietly. He called a pack run that evening. Tradition before action, the pack needed to feel each other to run as one. 40 wolves poured out of the castle gates and down the cliff path in a grey river of fur and muscle. Mag stayed behind. "Go," she told him. "Run it off, then come back and fix this." He shifted in the courtyard, massive and dark, and led them out. The run was what they all needed. The silent communion, the wordless knowing of 40 heartbeats synchronized. He felt each of his wolves. Declan solid at his right flank, the younger ones burning off nervous energy, the older ones pacing themselves steady. He was the alpha, and they were his. They returned at moonrise, shaking off the shift, pulling on clothes. Edric felt whole, ready. The wolf never want to miss an opportunity for encouragement. That was beautiful. We moved as one. We are a team. Now we go and protect everything we love. Also, tomorrow we should try pancakes. Pancakes are the next frontier. Declan, tugging on his boots, watched Elfa courtyard. She had come out to see the pack return, wrapped in a heavy cloak, her hair falling loose down her back. Beta Marcus, pulling on his shirt nearby, glanced at her. Elizabeth immediately looked at the ground. Marcus immediately looked at the sky. Neither spoke. Then slowly Marcus set down his boot and walked over. He said something too quiet for Declan to hear. Elizabeth replied, equally quiet. They stood there for perhaps 5 seconds, not looking at each other, before Marcus nodded and returned to his boots. Elizabeth remained watching him dress, the faintest hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. Declan sighed. Falconry cancelled. They have achieved simultaneous conversation. I am cautiously hopeful. This security crisis may have broken through the wall of mutual terror. I am choosing to attribute this to my strategic genius rather than to shared fear and proximity. The crisis also forced them into practical cooperation. When the castle mobilized to prepare for the rogue threat, the supply inventory had to be checked and recounted. Everything from weapons to medical supplies. Somehow Declan managed to assign both Elizabeth and Marcus to the count. Neither had objected, which was suspicious, but both had showed up. The 6 hours they worked in the castle storage rooms without speaking. Elizabeth counted bandages. Marcus marked them on the ledger. He said 345, and she said, correct. And they continued, but gradually, as the silence stretched, something changed. Marcus began making observations about the organization of the stores, the fact that the winter stores had been moved twice, the likelihood that they'd shifted during the last earthquake. Elbith slowly began responding. Not with full words always, just nods and soft sounds of agreement. By the 3rd hour, Marcus was theorizing about whether the castle's water reserves were stored properly for winter, and Elizabeth was actually answering him with technical details about moisture and storage vessels. In the 5th hour, Marcus reached for a crate of bandages on a high shelf. Applause. Hey, 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 hey. Hi, hey, hi, hey. Hi, hey, hi, hey, hi, hey. A-chay, hey, hey, hi, hey. Away, hays. Shay, hey, hi, hey. Away, hays. Abay, hey. Bay, hey. Hequai. Hequai. Hiker both dropped to their knees to gather them, reaching for the same roll at the same time. Their hands touched. They recoiled from each other so violently that Marcus's elbow caught the shelf behind him and knocked a second crate loose. It hit the floor with a spectacular crash, scattering medical supplies across the room like shrapnel. They stared at each other across the wreckage, both bright red, both frozen, surrounded by enough bandages to dress an entire army. Declan, who had been watching from the doorway, quietly closed his journal and walked away. By the time they finished cleaning up, they'd held an actual conversation about the organization of the stores, the water reserves, the best methods for moisture-proofing grain. Both of them so focused on the task at hand that their usual shyness had evaporated. When they stood up from the final count, Marcus looked at her with surprise, and something that might have been hope. Elizabeth, gathering the ledgers, allowed herself a small smile that was definitely meant for him. Chapter 10. Edric set the trap 3 days later. He'd restructured the eastern patrols, using Mag's revised rotation. Tighter, less predictable, and left a deliberate gap near the Blackridge Pass. If the rogues had inside information, they'd see the gap. They'd come through it, and he'd be waiting. He spent the afternoon making a pie. It was becoming a ritual. The cooking before a fight calmed the part of him that needed to do something with his hands. The crust was almost right this time. The filling smelled of apples and cinnamon and hope. The wolf assessed the pie with its usual warmth. This is our best work yet. The crust has structure. The filling has soul. We are becoming who we were meant to be. We are a warrior and a baker and a father, and all of these things are the same thing. Also, we are nervous. This is good. Nervous means we care. Nervous means the pups are real. He left the pie for me with a note back by dawn. Don't wait up. Don't eat it all. And rode east with Declan, 20 of his best fighters. They waited at the Black Ridge in wolf form, silent and still in the dark pines. Edric could smell them before he saw them, the sharp, unwashed, desperate scent of packless wolves. It was a smell that always made something in him ache, the wrongness of a wolf without a pack. But these wolves weren't just lost. They were organized, moving in formation, 8 of them coming through the gap exactly as predicted. Their movements rehearsed and precise. The waiting was the hardest part. Edric lay in the dark pines, feeling every inch of his wolf's skin, feeling the weight of his responsibility, feeling the mate asleep in the castle 3 miles away. His pups, his territory, his people. Everything he'd fought for was balanced on the next few minutes. He reviewed the plan in his head one more time. Declan and 4 wolves would cut off the northern escape. Thoren and 6 would hold the southern ridge. Edric would take the remaining 9 and block the western path completely. The rogues would come from the east, following the trail they'd been marked. Edric would meet them first. The moon was high and clear. Edric could see the patrol routes from his vantage point, the cleared areas where they deliberately thinned the brush to create firing lines. Mag's work, refined and executed, her mind working through strategy, while he'd been grilling about porridge. She was the one who'd suggested the trap in the first place. They'd talked it through while he burned eggs yesterday morning. She traced the rogue movements, predicted they'd try the Blackridge Gap again because it was the narrowest point, the place where a coordinated attack would have the most advantage. She'd been right as always. The scent came first. Rogue stench, acrid and wrong, moving through the pines with careless speed. They thought the gap was unguarded. They thought Stonefall was still scrambling to understand the threat. They thought they had an advantage. They were 3 minutes from discovering they were wrong. The robes emerged into the moonlight clearing like predators. Their bodies tense, their movements coordinated. 8 of them moving in a formation that suggested multiple runs, multiple coordinated attacks. Whoever had trained them had done it with purpose. This was no random group of desperate packless wolves. This was a weapon. Then the rogues were in the pass, and it was time. The fight was fast and brutal and exactly what Edric needed. He was the first one into the gap. The grey-black blur of muscle and fury and the primal alpha instinct that had been misfiring into porridge and pie for weeks finally found its proper target. He fought like what he was, a king defending his territory. His mate, his unborn pups, every frustrated morning in the kitchen, every broken spoon, every burnt offering, all of it had been this energy with nowhere to go. Now it had somewhere to go. He was faster than they were, stronger, smarter. His strikes were precise, not viciousness for its own sake, but the economy of movement of a practiced warrior. He disarmed the first rogue of advantage by moving low, driving underneath its attack, and rolling it over hard ground. The wolf yelped and scrambled back, dazed. Edric didn't press. A wounded rogue was less useful for interrogation than a scared one. The second rogue came at him from the side, clearly thinking to catch him while he was occupied. Edric twisted, caught it on the shoulder, felt the satisfying connection of impact. One rogue went down hard, unable to rise. Another fell screaming as Declan took it from behind, driving it to ground with the precision of someone who trained for exactly this kind of combat. His wolves cut off the escape routes, moving in perfect synchronization with their king. 3 of the rogues broke and fled into the dark, too frightened or too injured to continue. The remaining 5 were pinned, overwhelmed, captured. Declan landed a brilliant strike on the largest of the captured rogues, a scarred creature with missing teeth. The wolf went down, dazed. Declan didn't press the advantage. In human form, he circled his presence enough. The rogue shifted back, whimpering, and broke immediately under questioning. "Paid," the rogue gasped. Blood from a bitten tongue mixing with saliva. "We were paid. Someone steward Cragspire colors. They came to us in the neutral grounds. Said they'd pay in silver and supplies if we tested the eastern defenses." Declan pressed harder, tested them. "How? What were you measuring?" The rogue's eyes darted between them. "How fast you'd respond. How many wolves you'd send. Whether the king would come himself or send others." He swallowed, his voice cracking. "They wanted to know if the eastern passes were still defended like they used to be, or if the king had gone soft. Those were the words, gone soft. They said the king was distracted, that he spent his mornings cooking instead of commanding, that the pregnant Luna was doing his thinking for him." The rogue looked at Edric, massive grey-black blood on his muzzle, very much not soft, and something like regret crossed his face. "They said the eastern passes could be retaken, that Cragspire would hold them again within the year, if the intelligence was right." The name came next, dragged out like teeth. Hessen, a steward of Cragspire, connected to Alistair Finch. Edric, still in wolf form, let the pieces click together. Crags by colors, the eastern passes. The routes Alistair had told them to their faces were rightfully his. He shifted back, breathing hard. His hands were shaking. Adrenaline, fury, and something else. These were the same hands that had held Black and Toast that morning. The same hands that would hold his pups. The wolf, catching its breath, offered its assessment. "We protected them. We did what we were meant to do. We are a destroyer and a provider, and both things matter. Both things make us whole." Chapter 11. The trail led through 2 days of investigation that Mag ran with the precision of a supply chain audit to a steward in Alistair Finch's traveling party. Me worked in her study, tracing the money through 5 different intermediaries, cross-referencing steward travel records with rogue sighting dates. The pattern emerged slowly, methodically, inevitable. She spread ledgers across her desk, comparing the dates the steward had been in the borderlands with the dates of the rogue sightings. Everyone matched. September 7th, the steward was in the Black Ridge Pass. September 7th, the rogues were sighted at Black Ridge Pass. September 12th, the steward was near Green Hollow. September 12th, the attack on the shepherd's flock. She traced the connection backwards through 7 separate incidents, each one a perfect correspondence between the steward's location and reported rogue activity. Then she found the payments, small disbursements from Alistair's personal accounts, transferred to an intermediary who'd been spotted in neutral territory, meeting with packless wolves. 500 gold pieces here, 300 there. Always an amount small enough not to trigger the quarterly review, but significant enough to pay an entire group of robes in food, supplies, and promise. Discrepancies in the quarterly accounting that pointed to the withdrawals, missing entries, double-posted transfers, the careful obfuscation of someone who understood how to hide money, but didn't understand that me understood ledgers better than she understood breathing. She cross-referenced the intermediary against Alistair's documented steward positions and found a match. Hessen, appointed to Alistair's personal service 3 years ago. Hessen had been in every location where the payments were made. Hessen had access to Alistair's accounts. Hessen, when she traced the records further back, had connections to several known packless wolf communities. The pattern was so clean it was almost beautiful. Someone had wanted Stonefall tested. Someone had wanted to measure their vulnerability. And someone, most likely Alistair, though he was far too clever to touch the actual transactions himself, had decided that now was the time to acquire that information. Edric found her there at 3:02 in the morning, still working, a cup of cold tea at her elbow, her bump pressing against the edge of the desk as she leaned forward. She was wearing his shirt over her nightgown, a detail that made his wolf want to wrap around her and never let her move again. He pushed the instinct down and made her fresh tea instead. He carried it in carefully, set it beside her ledgers with the quiet pride of a man who had managed to boil water without incident. Mag picked it up without looking, took a sip, and paused. Her eyes lifted from the ledger. She looked at the tea. She looked at him. "You made this yourself, didn't you?" "I did." She held his gaze, reached across the desk, and slid the cup to the far corner without breaking eye contact. Then she went back to the ledger. The wolf. She is prioritizing the investigation over hydration. This is focus. We admire this. Also, the tea was fine. The tea had not been fine. It was Alistair's steward, she said. Essen, he paid them out of Alistair's personal account. The dates match perfectly. Every sighting corresponds to a day when Hessen was in the borderlands. You've been working for hours. I've been working since sunrise yesterday. I needed to confirm the pattern. She finally looked up, her eyes bright with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd solved a puzzle. Alistair's trying to map our vulnerabilities. He's testing us. He's testing whether we're weak enough to take, Edric said quietly. Whether the pregnancy has slowed me, whether we're vulnerable. We met his gaze steadily. Are we? No. He set the tea down beside her ledgers. We're not. Alistair himself maintained plausible deniability. He was far too theatrical to get his own hands dirty, but the evidence was enough to end his tariff negotiations permanently and send him back to Cragspire. He left the castle with his black fur cloak trailing behind him, his silver hair no longer catching the light quite the same way. I'm almost disappointed, Max said, reviewing the final evidence in her study. His operational security was a steward with a traceable payroll. He's a politician, not a spy, Edric said from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed, watching her work. He could have spent the afternoon in the council chamber. Instead, he was here. What? She said, looking up. Nothing. I just like watching you dismantle people. She almost smiled. Then she tapped a final notation in the ledger. The difference between 2 separate shipment logs for the same grain delivery. One for the official record, one for the actual delivery. He wasn't just testing our borders, Edric. He was testing whether the routes could be his again. Everything he said in that council chamber, my people built them. We simply ask for fairness. That wasn't a tariff dispute. That was a man staking a claim and measuring how hard you'd push back. And now he knows we're not. Now he knows, she agreed. She leaned back in her chair, exhaustion hitting her suddenly. She was 6 months pregnant and had spent 2 days running the most complicated investigation of her tenure. Her back hurt. Her feet hurt. The pups were doing something acrobatic that felt vaguely uncomfortable. He's going to be very angry. Let him be angry in Crags, Edric said. He brought a hand to rest gently on her shoulder. A question, asking permission. She leaned into the touch. He chose to test us instead of trust us. That's a choice, and it has consequences. She was quiet for a moment. Then I've been thinking about how you could have handled this differently. You could have sent Declan to investigate. You could have consulted the council, made it political. Instead, you went to the Blackage yourself. Edric was quiet. She could feel him considering her words, taking them seriously. You found the financial trail. I provided the military confirmation. That's partnership. You also fought 8 rogues while I was in a study with ledgers. That's not partnership. That's you being a warrior and me being a logistician. He laughed, not unkindly, just the laugh of a man who understood what she was really worried about. Me, if you wanted to fight rogues, you would fight rogues. You chose ledgers because that's your strength. My strength is fighting. Your strength is finding patterns. We use our strengths. I don't like that you take the physical risk and I take the intellectual risk. Physical risks can be survived. Intellectual risks mean you make a mistake and innocent people suffer because of your miscalculation. I take 8 rogues over that responsibility. He bent down and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You're terrifying when you work. Did you know that? The way you focus, the way nothing else matters until you've solved it. That's why Alistair's plan failed. Because we have someone smarter than him and he didn't know it until it was too late. She wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She leaned her head against his arm and let it go. Declan's journal, day 18. The rogues are dealt with. The king fought magnificently and then came home and burned a casserole. Lord Alistair has been sent packing. The Queen traced the entire conspiracy through a payroll discrepancy and matched sighting dates to steward travel records. Her mind works like a ledger, every column balanced, every number accounted for. I have never been less essential. Also, Elizabeth and Marcus were seen talking during the rogue debriefing. Extended conversation, nearly 2 sentences from each. Apparently, a shared security crisis is the icebreaker I should have been planning all along. They still will look at each other, but there's something different now. Something warmer. I need a drink and sleep. Primarily sleep. Chapter 12. The night after the rogue attack, Edric couldn't sleep. It wasn't the fight. He'd had worse. It was the quiet afterward, the settling of something that had been unsettled for weeks. He lay in bed, me curled against him, and let himself feel the full weight of it. He'd spent weeks trying to prove he could be something other than what he was, a builder instead of a destroyer, a nurturer instead of a conqueror, and the cooking had been terrible. Had been, if he was honest, the worst sustained performance of his life in any field, but the fight at the Blackage had been effortless, perfect. He'd known exactly what to do, exactly how to move, exactly when to strike. He was a warrior. That was what his hands were for. Except they weren't. Not only because the same hands that had broken a rogue's charge at the Black Ridge had that morning carefully and terribly arranged 3 berries on a bowl of cement-like porridge for the woman sleeping beside him. And both things had been real. Both things had been him, the wolf never missing a moment for growth. You see, this is what we have been trying to tell you. You are not one thing. You are all of the things. The warrior and the baker and the father. The toast was black and the fight was one, and neither of those cancels the other out. This is called being a whole person. We are very proud of you. Tomorrow we try omelets. Stop thinking so loudly, Mag murmured against his chest. I can hear you from here. How do you know I'm thinking? You stop breathing when you think. It's very dramatic. She shifted, propping her chin on his chest so she could see his face. Talk to me. I keep trying to be something I'm not, he said quietly. The cooking. It's terrible. Everything I make is terrible. And tonight I went out and did the one thing I'm actually good at. And it was easy, and I came back and I thought, maybe I should just stop. Stop pretending I can do this domestic thing. Be the king, be the warrior, and let Chef Anel make the breakfast. Me was quiet for a moment. Her fingers traced the ridge of his collarbone. A gentle, thoughtful touch. Do you want to stop? He thought about it. Really? Thought with the part of him that was honest. No. Why not? Because he searched for the words. Because when I bring you that burnt toast and you eat it and you say something kind about it, that's the bravest thing I do all day. Braver than fighting. Fighting I know how to do. The toast terrifies me. She reached up and traced the line of his jaw with her finger, following the angle of it, the bone structure that shifted slightly when he shifted. Edric Greer, she said softly, you fought off 8 rogue wolves tonight, and the thing that scares you is breakfast. Breakfast is harder. Breakfast has expectations. She laughed, quiet, warm, real. Then she said, "You don't have to be good at it. You just have to keep doing it. That's what it means, the trying. That's what the pups will remember, not whether the eggs were edible." He pulled her closer, pressing his face into her hair. She smelled of lavender and ink and the faint new scent of the pups, and it was the best thing in the world. His wolf settled against him, content and certain. "I love you," he said, the words simple and undecorated. "I know. I love you too. Now go to sleep, and tomorrow, for the love of the goddess, please do not set anything on fire." The wolf settling in for the night. "She believes in us. We believe in us. Rest now. Tomorrow is Omelette Day. Omelette Day will be magnificent. We are nearly certain it will be terrible, but we will try anyway. And that is the whole point of being alive." Chapter 13. The morning of the gathering of packs. Edric was up before dawn. He had 2 tasks. Prepare the welcome feast, a decision that made Declan physically flinch when he heard it, and host the Northern Ridge Alphas for the renewal of oaths. The feast was predictably a disaster. The puff pastry had the consistency of a leather shoe. The fish was overcooked into dried parchment. The dessert, a custard, had separated into a weeping, curdled mess that looked more like a failed chemistry experiment than food. But Edric served it with his head held high, and the other alphas who had all heard about the Blackage fight and the dismantling of Alistair's rogue network, and the queen who could trace a conspiracy through a payroll entry, ate it without complaint. One of the younger alphas tried a piece of the puff pastry. It broke a tooth. He took it in stride, spitting the fragment into a napkin, and continued eating. Good structural integrity, he managed, his voice only slightly strained. Another alpha approached the custard with the caution of a man diffusing a weapon. She touched it with a spoon. It wobbled alarmingly. She moved on to the salad, which thankfully Edric had wisely chosen to have prepared by Chef and Elm. Elder Maeve of the Mountain Pack picked up a bread roll, tapped it on her plate. Clack, clack, testing its structural integrity. She set it down and met Edric's gaze directly. "King Edric," she said, "is this a test of our dental fortitude?" The room went very quiet, Mag watching from her seat beside the hearth. She'd refused to stand for the entire ceremony, and Edric had chosen not to argue about it, held her breath. "Is the work in progress," Edric said. "Like the kingdom." Maeve looked at him for a long moment, her ancient eyes assessing. Then she laughed, a rare growly sound like rocks tumbling down a mountainside. "I'll take an honest king who can't cook over a polished one who can't fight. Your borders are secure. Your mate is brilliant, and this bread roll could be used as a weapon in an emergency, which given recent events is not entirely without value." The room laughed. Edric felt something loosen in his chest. Around the tables, alphas began eating again, making careful decisions about which dishes seemed less likely to cause dental damage. But eating nonetheless. From across the room, Mag caught his eye. One of the pups rolled inside her, and she pressed a hand to her belly. Edric saw the gesture. His face changed. Something softer, something private, something that had nothing to do with the room full of alphas watching him. Just him and her, and the small, strong movement under her hand. "The wolf, she likes us. Everyone likes us. We are beloved." The bread roll is a success by alternative metrics. All food is successful if it brings people together. We are a philosopher now. Also, we should attempt Sulet's next. And maybe she should sit down. Pregnancy is important. We do not like that she is standing. Chapter 14. 2 months later, Meg delivered 2 healthy, noisy, perfect twins, a boy, Finenian, and the girl, Riona. Edric held them, one in each arm. His heart so full, he thought it might burst. They were so small, so fragile. "Is his pups." Mag washed him from the bed, tired but radiant. She let him have his moment, then. "So you're making their breakfast, right?" Edric looked from the sleeping face of his son to the alert eyes of his daughter, then to his mate. The wolf, reverent and certain. "Yes, every morning for the rest of our lives. It will be terrible, and it will be ours, and they will know they were loved. This is the greatest purpose we have ever had. Greater than the howling plains, greater than the river packs. We are ready. Edric grinned. Absolutely. Within the month, he set the kitchen on fire again. A spectacular blaze involving an experimental pancake batter and a misunderstanding about the difference between baking powder and baking soda. Apparently, they were not interchangeable despite being stored in similar containers. The resulting explosion was so impressive that 3 castle guards came running thinking they were under siege. From their high chairs, the twins watched the plumes of smoke rise past the kitchen windows, their eyes wide with delight. Fine giggled. Riona clapped her tiny hands. Chef Anil made a small pained sound and retired to the wine cellar. That night, long after the smoke had cleared and the twins were asleep in their crib, Edric shifted in the nursery, not to run, not to fight, just to be. The wolf lay on the stone floor beside the crib, massive and grey-black, his chin resting on his paws. He could hear 2 small heartbeats, fast and steady. He could smell them. Milk, warmth. The faint new scent that was theirs and no one else's. The scent of his pups, the scent of the future. The wolf rested, its spirit quieter now than it had been in years. The constant motion, the pacing, the need to prove something. It had settled. There were 2 small beings in that crib that depended on him. The cook that burned breakfast mattered. The warrior that fought rogues mattered. They were the same thing. They were both necessary. Mag found him there in the morning, still in wolf form, still on the floor. She'd shifted in the night, too, her own wolf curled in the corner of the room, watching the crib and their mate. Now she was human again, wrapped in a robe, moving carefully around his massive form. She knelt beside him, scratched behind his ear, and said, "You're not making them porridge." The wolf huffed. It sounded unmistakably like a laugh. "Toast," she continued. Another huff, more amused this time. "Eggs." The wolf lifted its head, considering its tongue lulled out in what might have been a smile. Then it stood, stretched, and padded to the kitchen door. The message was clear. Yes, eggs. Let us try eggs again. Perhaps today is the day we achieve competence. Marg laughed and followed him down the hall. Dectham's journal. Final entry. Day 94. The king set the kitchen on fire again. The twins applauded. Chef Solm has requested a transfer to a monastery. I have denied it. Elizabeth and Marcus have been seen holding hands at court, which I am choosing to attribute to my strategic matchmaking rather than to the series of shared crises and proximity that actually brought them together. They are attending the spring fair together next week. I've achieved my purpose. I will retire from matchmaking with honor. The Queen continues to run the kingdom's logistics with terrifying efficiency. The king continues to run the kingdom with the authority of a man who has earned every ounce of his people's respect. And every morning, without fail, he gets up before dawn and he goes into that kitchen and he tries. The food is still awful. Last week's scrambled eggs achieved the consistency of rubber. The toast this morning was simultaneously burnt and undercooked, a feat I did not know was possible. But the trying is the most kingly thing I have ever seen. It is the thing that will define his reign. Not the battles he's won or the territories he's conquered, but the fact that he shows up every morning and tries. But he keeps trying even when he fails, because it matters to him that he tries, because it matters to his mate. Because it will matter to his pups. That is legacy. That is the true measure of a